exemplary service to the cause of upliftment of women. It's an honor and a privilege to have you with us today, ma'am.
Thank you.
We also have with us Ms. Maria Beatrice Orlando, our keynote speaker. She is a lead social specialist in the Social Sustainability and Inclusion Division at the World Bank. She is a PhD in economics, is actively involved in several training and capacity building workshops. Her research, operational work, and of course her blogs are focused on issues such as labor markets, poverty, and gender discrimination. Before joining the World Bank, she worked as a resource associate for the global development in Washington, D.C., with the United Nations Millennium Project Task Force on Education and Gender Equality. During her tenure as professor, she has also authored several studies, such as the gender wage gap in Venezuela. We're looking forward to an enriching session with you today, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored and happy to be here.
Thank you, ma'am. May I also welcome Dr. Harbeen Arora, the founder president of WICCI. Dr. Arora is also the founder and global chairperson of All Ladies League and Women's Economic Forum. She is an author, a businesswoman, a philanthropist, and much more. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, ma'am. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, my sisters. May I come in? Is it time to speak for me?
And last, let me introduce and congratulate my mentor, Ms. Anju Kapoor, for taking up the mantle as National President of WICCI Ash Council today. She is the founder of AKMD Legal and a sociologist. She has done her master's in corporate law and frequents as an adjunct professor in top law colleges. She also conducts several workshops and seminars on various legal issues for institutions, schools, colleges, and companies. May I now request Ms. Harbeen Arora, founder president of WICCI, to say a few words to our audience.
Thank you, Nikita, for the very kind introduction and such a warm welcome to all our esteemed guests and dignitaries today. Justice Geeta Mittal, it is an honor, a privilege, such a moment to have you here with all of us at the launch of the Anti-Sexual Harassment Council of the Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Really, this is a moment I hold very dear to my heart, and please give me bragging rights about it, because I'd love to tell people I was on an event and a webinar with Justice Geeta ji. Thank you so much. Dear soul sister Maria, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really honored with your kind presence. And Anju, my dear soul sister, you have energized this council. It's such an important part. Everybody needs to resolve these issues around harassment per se, sexual harassment in particular. I was just telling Anju before you joined in, Honorable Justice Ji, that the digital space should not suffer the same fate as the public space has suffered vis-a-vis security and dignity and respect for women. Unfortunately, every woman experiences fear hidden somewhere in her subconscious mind when she steps out into the public sphere, especially at night, and finds herself very constrained. The same thing should not happen in the digital space, which is just so exponentially opened up for all of us. This should be an opportunity for all of women to be empowered economically and socially, which is the mandate of Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to ensure that women find empowering ecosystems of networks, of policies, of empowerment, of mentoring, so that they can just do whatever they want to do and fulfill themselves as women. And I want to thank Anju for taking this big quantum jump towards really ensuring that we have torchbearers and we have guardians like Justice Geeta Mittal at the forefront of this initiative. I could not have asked for a better start. Just those humble words with immense gratitude. I look forward to learning and hearing from all of you and being guided in this endeavor that we have undertaken at WICCI. Namaskar. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome. Honorable Justice Geeta Mittal, Chief Justice, Jammu and Kashmir High Court. Maria Beatrice Orlando, Lead Social Specialist, World Bank. Dr. Harbeen Arora, Founder President, Wiki, and my dear guests. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this inaugural session for the launch of the Anti-Sexual Harassment Council, which we refer to as the ASH Council. We are privileged to have amongst us Justice Geeta Mittal as the guest of honor. Maria Beatrice joins us from Washington, D.C. as the keynote speaker. This council, the ASH Council, aims to make a call to end sexual harassment, to create safer spaces for women. It wants to ensure that women are aware of their rights and the available resources. We want to make a real shift towards culture of respect and accountability. We want a legislation that is proactive rather than reactive to sexual harassment. Our council aspires to bring together women from different fields and specializations, women who are committed to the cause of women. As a lawyer and a sociologist, I have always very strongly felt about creating awareness on social issues and the laws pertinent to them. Gender-based violence, gender-based discrimination, causes of women and children are very dear to me. Gender-based violence, discrimination, and sexual harassment are not confined to any class, strata, or race. They permeate every layer of our society. Though the general rhetoric is to create awareness, to afford protection to the uneducated and the marginalized, but I very firmly believe that even the most educated women, financially independent working women, are equally prone to gender-based violence and sexual harassment. Women have faced sexual harassment at workplace for years altogether. There are a lot of laws to control it, but somehow it has continued unabated. And in today's scenario, with work from home and virtual workplaces, the face of sexual harassment has changed again. So today I am going to speak about sexual harassment laws and sexual harassment at workplaces, specifically to India. Pranjal, could you bring on the slides, please? So talking about sexual harassment in India we know that our constitution guarantees right to life, and the court has reiterated, Supreme Court has reiterated time and again that this is a fundamental right, but right to life means life with dignity. Then we have the right to equality, which means and assures that there cannot be any gender-based discrimination. The government and the civil society are bound to ensure and create safe spaces as well as a just society. We have many laws in India to protect women from physical as well as emotional abuse and violence. But we find that our Indian Penal Code, Pranjal, you could move the slides, please. We find that the Indian Penal Code, which has a lot of provisions pertaining to voyeurism, stalking, eve-teasing, sexual assault, rape, dowry, all of this has been there since time immemorial, yet we found crimes against women to be rising and also a huge hesitation to report this crime. And then we had a case called the Vishakha case, many of you might be aware, wherein Bhavri Devi, Anganwadi worker who was working in Rajasthan and campaigning against child marriage, was brutally gang raped. And when she reached the police station to lodge an FIR, instead of helping, she was mocked at, she was harassed, to the extent that she was asked to leave behind the skirt she was wearing, which was, with full of blood stains, that it would work as evidence. This case created huge, hue and cry in India. And finally, in 1997, the Supreme Court of India laid down guidelines to keep women sexually safe at the workplace. These guidelines were pronounced in 1997. However, it was in 2013 that our parliament enacted the legislation, the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace. This is popularly known as the POSH Act. Moving on to the POSH Act, we see that this act provides that, that sexual harassment refers to any unwelcome act or behavior. So it is a very inclusive definition. It covers not just physical contact or advance, but any kind of sexually colored remark, any untoward behavior, verbal, non-verbal, which is sexual in nature. It also defines the workplace in a very, very broad manner. It refers to the workplace as any and every place which an employee visits in the course of her employment for reasons arising out of her employment. Further, this act goes on to put huge responsibility on the employer. It says that every employer is required to create and communicate a detailed anti-sexual harassment policy. This policy needs to be prominently displayed in the office space. He needs to organize regularly trainings and workshops to sensitize all employees about this policy and implications of sexual harassment. Then, if the office has more than 10 employees, it does not matter whether they are men or women, part-time or full-time, they are required to have an internal complaint committee which is to redress any complaints of sexual harassment which any woman in the office may file. It is also required to come up with the facilities for the working of this complaints committee, popularly known as the ICC. And also, at the end of every year, the employer is required to submit an annual report to the local complaints committee about any cases of sexual harassment reported in the year and what is the resolution and action the organization has taken. So with this background, we see that in the current climate, with the new mantra being work from home, work on virtual platforms, this is the new norm. When this norm kicked in, I guess employees were very happy that at least they are retaining their jobs and they happily switched over to virtual workplaces. But the reality is that not everyone has a separate room or a separate desk to work from in their homes. So this narrative of work from home, though it got on very fast, this did not alert women to the fact that in the virtual workspaces, they were inviting their supervisors, their colleagues and clients to their homes, to their living rooms, and in some cases to their bedrooms. So now what we find, the cases that have spiked have been widely reported is of sexual harassment at workplace. This is taking many forms, such as male colleagues showing up dressed inappropriately or underdressed, taking screenshots of female colleagues without their permissions, messaging them at all hours, talking about feeling lonely, scheduling meetings late into the night, and insisting that all their colleagues switch on their videos. Also, they are attending meetings lying on the bed or their couches. Furthermore, pajama parties are being organized, and again, there is pressure for the female colleagues to join in. They are joining calls and participating in workshops drunk, intoxicated. Bullying and shouting has become the norm in the virtual workspaces. These are some of the things which have been reported, and sadly, women are still hesitant to formally lodge complaints against such actions. And one of the common reasons is that there is still a mindset that this is not sexual harassment. Women are feeling harassed. They are, hesitant to log into meetings. They want to avoid the work, going online, but they still do not call it sexual harassment, because somewhere there is a belief that sexual harassment involves physical contact, and there is no physical contact. Moreover, women are not equipped to know how do they gather evidence or proof of online harassment. The office policies on sexual harassment do not talk about the work from home scenario. They do not talk about virtual workplaces. So they don't know what the do's and don'ts are, what is the code of conduct when we work online. And lastly, but very importantly, the Internal Complaints Committee, which is to redress all the complaints of women from the workplace, themselves are ill-equipped when it comes to cyber laws and IT laws. So this is the current scenario we are facing, I know world over, but definitely in India. Now, as I see, some of the suggestions or the way forward is that the definition of workplace is so broad under the POSH Act, right? It says any woman, any space a woman may visit in relation to her employment. So this is an inclusive definition, and it also extends the workplace. So the work from home, the virtual workplace scenario, though not specifically spelled out, would definitely be built into this definition. So what we need is a very liberal and contextual interpretation of the word workplace. Furthermore, at the office today, it has become very important for the organizations and the employers to modify their policies pertaining to sexual harassment. These must be modified to incorporate the virtual workplace. These policies need to be widely circulated, and trainings have to be conducted, capacity building, skill enhancement trainings for all employees to understand what is sexual harassment, and there should be a very clearly spelled out firm code of conduct for work from home. The internals committee members need to be familiarized with cyber laws and IT laws. So the bottom line is today the companies have to have an absolutely zero tolerance policy when it comes to sexual harassment. Enactment of rules for virtual meetings, sensitization workshops are the key. Government has to also pitch in and make sure that these laws are enforced, and employees have to be encouraged to report this harassment. So this is what is the way forward as we see it. But now we know that this is happening on a global front, and I would now request Maria Beatriz Orlando to please provide insights into this universal menace. Over to you, Maria Beatriz.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you so much, colleagues. I would like to first express my thanks, not just for being invited here, and I'm so honored to be here sharing this webinar with Chief Justice Mithal, but also with all of you. One of our colleagues referred to us, Nikita Garg, referred to us as soul sisters, and it definitely feels this way. So all the way from 2 oceans away, it is exactly the way this feels. So Andrew Kapoor, thank you so much for organizing this. Nikita Garg, thank you so much for organizing this and for all the work that you do at Wiki. I'm really impressed with your work. I'm also really happy to be communicating with India, a country that we can all learn so much from, because it has an advanced law. The POSH law is an advanced law, as Andrew already clearly described in her excellent presentation. So we have the framework, we have the laws, now we need to focus on the practice. So I would request if please someone could help project the presentation on screen. Thank you so much. Thank you. So again, it's a challenge to talk to you about sexual harassment from a global perspective. given the advanced law that you have in India and all the wealth of information that you have. From the point of view of the World Bank, this is a global problem. It really is very much, we see it as part of our overall gender equality strategy, and all the work we do as an organization, which of course also we do have our own problems in terms of sexual harassment in the workplace, and are trying really hard to really address these. And also in terms of our development work, our projects, and all our dialogue with our clients. Really, from a very fundamental perspective, as women join the workforce and gain their place, the right place at the table, this joining is being prevented really deeply from sexual harassment in the workplace. So from a global perspective, and if we take a little bit of a step back into the conceptual realm, if you wish, sexual harassment is part of gender-based violence. And when we talk about gender-based violence, and we try to paint a global picture, it is a very ugly picture, and I'm afraid I don't have good news to share with you. It's also the prevalence of gender-based violence around the world is not coming down. I mean, this data that you have on the screen is the data we have up to 2013. I know it's not very up to date, but these are surveys that have the right standards in terms of measurement. This is intimate partner violence, which is a proxy for other forms of violence against women and gender-based violence more generally. Around 2022, we will have comparable data around the world. There are some more recent surveys, but this is the data that is comparable across regions. The global consensus, given all the data and information we have and all the surveys that the WHO has been developing throughout the years, is that 1 out of 3 women has experienced at least one form of gender-based violence throughout her lifetime. 1 out of 3. And this is true across, pretty much tends to be true across education levels, income levels, and across the world. If anything, in South Asia, this figure is about 43% of women. So South Asia is the region in the world with the highest overall prevalence of gender-based violence. And as you know, this is rooted in social norms. And the reason why I talk about gender-based violence more generally is because sexual harassment is a crude manifestation of the overall norms that allow, enable, and sustain a system of violence against women. And in the workplace, the manifestation comes, of course, because women, again, having their place at the table challenges some traditional norms. So again, the global picture is an ugly picture, and the picture for South Asia is even worse. Already, Andrew, you defined very well. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Andrew defined very clearly, according to the POSH law, the definition of sexual harassment, and it's very clear and very specific. And it focuses a lot on the manifestations of the behaviors and also how the survivor feels. And of course, the impact. As with other forms of gender-based violence, this comes from some of the studies we have at the World Bank, but also studies that organizations, firms have done internally. The risk factors are similar to other forms of gender-based violence, where you have, of course, societal factors. And again, India's law is a key preventive and key step ahead in terms of addressing sexual harassment, because we have at the society level this amazing law. Now the question is, are people aware of it? Is the law changing behaviors yet, or is it just a frame of reference? And of course, as Andrew explained, this is a factor of its implementation, jurisprudence, people seeing, and so happy to have colleagues here, and Chief Justice Mittal, who can speak to this. But impunity is one big enabler of sexual harassment in the workplace. At the community level and at the firm level, we also have other risk factors, depending on the type of work, depending on the type of workplace. As Andrew said, it's absolutely critical that the definition of workplace is taken in a broad and contextual manner. We at the World Bank, we have in our own organization-specific experience to this, we can't restrict the definition of sexual harassment to the office because as bank staff, we travel so much. And we work a lot from home as well. And nowadays we work from home and the lockdowns after COVID, definitely the workplace needs to be expanded as to perhaps any space where women are performing an economic activity, men are performing an economic activity, there are professional interactions, there is production, etc. I have to say that unfortunately, given preliminary data that we have, sexual harassment has it changed not just for educated workers who can work from home and telework as we're doing today, but also in the context of essential workers, workers in factories and so on, because the dynamics of work have been profoundly altered by the epidemic. If we go to the next slide. Next, please. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about why is it that at the World Bank, previous please, at the World Bank, why is it that we as an economic development organization, as you know, we are not a human rights organization, we are not UN Women, and a lot of the advances on this law have been thanks to the advocacy and studies by the UN and by, of course, India's own organizations. But why is it that as the World Bank, if you wish, as an economic development organization, we are joining forces with you? Why is that the case? Well, for us, our evidence indicates, and this comes from, yet we don't have a lot of data, but based on the qualitative data that we have and studies that have been conducted by firms, there is a lot of documentation of negative impacts on productivity, morale. Sexual harassment poisons the work environment, quite literally, not just for women and the survivors, but for everybody, because it essentially signals that respect and merit are not what really are the keys to advance. So studies from the US, from Europe, really are poignant in terms of the evidence in this regard. It hinders creativity. It of course has deep impacts on the survivor in terms of her health or his health, because there are also men who suffer of sexual harassment in many countries. Again, this is also very context specific. And there is also, of course, men on men sexual harassment. And women on women is less frequent, but definitely there is a lot of men on men sexual harassment, and we should not forget that, because LGBTI populations are also incredibly vulnerable to all forms of harassment, and sexual harassment in particular. It affects talent recruitment and retention, because nowadays younger, talented colleagues than myself, who are the leaders of today and tomorrow, really pay attention to work environment, and they really do their homework in terms of whether firms provide safe environments and good environments for female workers. So we may be missing on the best talent. And from the economic development perspective, overall, from a macro perspective, we have some evidence that indicates, and again, it's mostly qualitative, but I'll share the little bit of quantitative information that we have, that it may discourage female labor force participation. Families, households make decisions about work and about girls' education based a lot on objective factors, such as the rate of return to education, expected salary, etc., but also based on safety and security. And whether the insecurity in public spaces and at the workplace is real or perceived, families are making decisions based on their perceptions about sexual harassment in the workplace and what that does in terms of marriage prospects, reputation, health, etc., etc. Of course, and you all know this from your own personal experiences, it discourages women from also opting for jobs in male-dominated sectors. This, of course, is unfair. And again, everything about sexual harassment is terribly unfair and against human rights. But from an economic perspective, which is the perspective that I wanted to add today, is really bad economics, because it means that then in the labor market, you don't have the mobility and the flexibility that is needed for countries to have a labor market that is in tune with their growth and advancement, and shocks like COVID, for instance. Now people have to switch jobs because some firms may close. So if women and men are not freely moving and using their education, talent, energy across all occupations that are possible for them, that are available in their communities and in their capacity, there is something, this is not an efficient solution. So I just also wanted to make that an economic point. This is a little bit about the why. And I wanted, as I promised, I wanted to share a little bit of the data that we have coming up from the World Bank, particularly in South Asia. As an organization, as you know, one of our value-added, one of our contributions to the development community is to generate quantitative data. On sexual harassment, again, there is a lot of qualitative data that we use, but it doesn't come from us necessarily, or some comes from us, but it's not a unique value added. And there are also a lot of studies conducted at the firm level. Now, you may want to think about a whole economy, and while you implement the POSH law, the sexual harassment law in India, trying to see the positive impact of reducing sexual harassment also in terms of economic and social well-being. So we're trying to think in the World Bank at the moment about ways of collecting data on sexual harassment through quantitative surveys. And there are some surveys that have been piloted in different countries, but we're also piloting some of our own. So recently in Pakistan, in the city of Peshawar, we conducted one survey that is part of an urban poverty survey, and tells us that about 32% of respondents experience at least one form of sexual harassment in public spaces or the workplace. But again, I mean, usually this figure in other countries and in other studies is between 60 and 80%. So why was it so low in this Peshawar study? And we discovered that, of course, in Peshawar, very few women work. So they don't even know what sexual harassment in the workplace is because they have never worked. And also 64% of women who responded that they have never experienced sexual harassment is because they completely shun public spaces. They're barely in any public or workspace. So of course, sadly, 94% of women are not interviewed are not aware of sexual harassment laws. It would be very important to get to know from colleagues what is the situation in India about the awareness on the POSH law. And this is going to be a lot of work for all of us together, for Wiki, for everyone. I mean, awareness about the law is critical, and campaigns are not the only thing that are important. We also have a forthcoming study on the impact of COVID and on domestic violence and sexual harassment. We have one small study that will be coming up shortly about on India, on gig economy workers. As you know, India has circa 15 million gig workers, and a lot of them are women. And yes, indeed, Andrew, we share the same concern. Our data shows, preliminary data shows that with the COVID epidemic and the lockdown, female workers in the gig economy, which is a very specific segment, are increasingly experience domestic violence, but also all kinds of forms of sexual harassment. So yes, we have the same, we confirm the same findings as you do. If you go to the next slide, I want to also tell you a little bit about what can be done. And this is more for brainstorming and for all of us to construct together. And already Andrew mentioned in her presentation and several things that can be done, and colleagues in Wiki are working on this every day. These points come from a meta-analysis of impact evaluations, a global analysis that we conducted on gender-based violence more generally, but I picked the lessons that I feel apply very much to the prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace, and also that helps us address the issue. The first one is to include and engage. This shouldn't be a women's issue. And this is one of the hardest hurdles, and I would love to hear your views on this. We need to engage men. We need to engage several stakeholders. We need leaders. We need champions. This cannot be relegated to a woman's issue. So how do we do, and you know, how can we do this together? And this is why I'm so happy that the World Bank was invited today, because we also have a role to play. We have a role to play in our projects, for instance, the projects we finance. We interact with project implementation units. We clear the contracts that these are done. And there is sexual harassment going on in those spaces. And we know that. We have had cases. So as an organization, we have new and very strict standards on prevention of sexual harassment and sexual exploitation and abuse in the context of our own projects. And we need your help, because this is new for us, and we are learning as we go, and we are trying our absolute best, but it is really an uphill battle. Andrew already mentioned codes of conduct. Having a law is not enough. It needs to be embedded in every day, in HR practice, in, you know, the messaging that managers send, in what families talk about. So codes of conduct are part of that normative change. And of course, it's about contractors, it's about HR policies, but it's a great start. And communicating around those codes of conduct, because oftentimes we have the experience that firms sign the codes of conduct, they have them, but they don't disseminate them. They're not known to the workers. So that is communication. Communication is crucial. And again, I'll skip straight to the fact that, again, simultaneously, we need to address structural drivers on the social norms and acceptability, the power and economic dynamics that drive sexual harassment. I mean, all employees need to feel that they're valuable, that they have rights, that they can report. And again, this takes persistence and time. So with this, I'll go to my last slide. I thank you so much for this chance to share with all of you. We need to persist. That meta-analysis of impact evaluations all over the world told us that all the interventions that showed any promise have been in place and persistently implemented for 6 months or more. There are no quick wins here. And this is a sobering news that we got from this evaluation. Everything, even the strongest community campaigns or firm level interventions that we examined, have to be in place consistently, at least for 6 months before one can see any change. So this is a big warning for these like kind of quick campaigns, media campaigns, and that nowadays are so common in our world with social media and everything. Sometimes one campaign that is 1 week can be quite intense from a social media point of view. From a marketing point of view, it may be very optimal, but from a gender-based violence, sexual harassment, sexual exploitation, and abuse point of view, they don't change people's mindsets. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maria Beatriz. And, you know, I'm really, I don't know, happy, excited to see, you know, that we have a lot in our common in our thinking, and how, you know, it all resonates, whether here in India or whether the world over, any part. And at one part, it's at one level, it's also very saddening that women all over the globe, you know, whether we speak of gig workers or whether we speak of women at the highest places, are experiencing this. And yes, not just the women. It is not just confined to women. Thank you. And now I would request Honorable Justice Geeta Mittal to share advice and guide us using her years of experience, first as a lawyer and now as a sitting judge, to help us realize how to cope, deal, and how to eradicate this increasing evil of sexual harassment. Ma'am, over to you.
What a task, Anju. How do you eradicate something that is so entrenched? But Dr. Harbeen Arora, Anju Kapoor, Nitika, may I call you Maria Beatrice from the World Bank? Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to be part of this very special program. My congratulations to Vicky for such a timely intervention and getting us to think about and focusing our energies and attention and energies on such a critical issue, you know, which certainly deserves and needs much more attention that it is receiving at the moment. I must congratulate Maria Beatrice for this wonderful presentation. I hope you will share your PowerPoint with us. I would love to save it and share it in and use it, share your presentation and use it in part of my trainings, which I am continuously undertaking here. I would also like to tell you that I deeply agree with you and share what you're saying, and I've said it continuously, that we would not achieve the required goals by just addressing and joining women in the sensitizations and the trainings. It is absolutely imperative to join men. But like I've seen in all gender related issues, the response is so difficult. You know, you begin by facing a brick wall when you begin on gender sensitization issues. And most men and even women treat this as a very hackneyed and overemphasized topic without realizing the depth of the malaise and the serious attention which it needs, especially now with modes of communication reaching, the virtual mode, where it's so difficult to even collate evidence to achieve prosecutions in courts or before ICCs, the internal complaint committees under the sexual harassment laws. But yes, you're right, Maria, as Anju has pointed out, 1997 was a huge milestone in the sexual harassment addressal mechanisms which evolved in India when the Supreme Court laid down the famous Vishaka guidelines. I think the Supreme Court of India is considered the most powerful Supreme Court in the world because of the manner in which it has stepped in wherever there was a legislative vacuum, and sexual harassment was a huge vacuum. The vacuum persisted for a good 13 years thereafter, and we did not get the law till 2013. The law has come, but yet I will, at the end of my presentation, I will deal a little bit with what the gaps are. But we need to understand the several difficulties which women per se face, whether it be, you have, Anju, coined the topic that I have to speak on women and the law. I'd focused my thoughts on sexual harassment, and then I diverted completely into women and the law and began thinking from which aspect I should deal with. But I'll come back to sexual harassment because time is less and we need to get on with this. So the legislative process actually took not 13, but it took 16 years to evolve. And as you pointed out, the definition of aggrieved women is very evolved. The definition of workplace is even more evolved and needs fine-tuning from the perspective of the virtual workspaces. But I'd point out one gap right away here, the difficulty where the definition of workplace, which is incorporated or results when you're talking of courts as workplaces. You see, courts are frequented not only by the staff or the judges, but they include witnesses, they include private parties, and they include lawyers. Lawyers are not employees of the court system. So the whole definition of the workplace vis-a-vis courts assumes a different context. And perhaps we need to look at workplaces from the context of contract employees and persons who are subcontractors or agencies who are assigned works. Today you see, for instance, this urban, urban company. You're hiring people who are going out, or I don't know how they work, but you see people providing services in their residences on behalf of a particular company. So whether they are employees, what is the relationship, and the harassment which they face, who is liable and under which law? So far as the law is concerned, you've dealt with it extensively. But in it, I will just briefly touch upon the evolution of the interpretation of the law in the courts in India. So we've had a series of judgments, where and several precedents which have interpreted the law in the context of its applicability, extent, implementation of these provisions. For instance, Medha Kotwal Lele, in that the court said that the law has to be applied in letter as well as spirit. Jahid Ali was a case in which the court considered sexually colored messages being shared over the mobile phone as covered under the scope of sexual harassment at workplace. In G. Pushkala, there was a High Court employee who was receiving the messages, utilizing from an officer, from a senior, utilizing his official position, calling upon requesting sexual favors from the complainant, passing slips, ringing her up late at night when she was with her husband. Praveen Pradhan dealt with a case of a suicide by an engineer on account of harassment by superiors and colleagues. In April Export Promotion Council, a very famous case in 1999, the Supreme Court categorically laid down the law that physical contact is not essential for the act of sexual harassment. And then further you see there are a series of judgments which have said that principles of natural justice, for instance, securing the rights of the respondent as well. Principles of natural justice have to be applied, which means notice to show cause has to be given. You have to give an opportunity to cross-examine the complainant. The manner in which the rights of the respondent would also be assured, so that he doesn't feel, I may call it, outnumbered, during the proceedings of the internal complaint committee. I had occasion to deal with a case where the respondent, who was who was alleged to have committed sexual harassment, had been denied opportunity to cross-examine the complainant, and he had brought a writ petition. Fortunately, it resolved by the complainant agreeing to be cross-examined if he gave questions in writing. So, cross-examination itself is a double-edged weapon, and it can be used to inflict secondary traumatization on a victim, on the complainant. You ask embarrassing questions. For instance, in cases involving sexual violence in court, you see victim blaming, you see attacking a character, you see attacks on the family, and which are questions which are completely irrelevant to the issue under consideration. So all this can be avoided if procedure is evolved whereby questions are taken in writing by the complaint committee, scrutinized before they are put to the complainant. So you see, the act itself gives the option to the committee to evolve a procedure which will work justice to both parties. Now, this is not to say that we have a perfect law, even though there was an amendment effected in the year 2016. But I have noticed that there are several gaps in the legislation. For instance, just as in cases of sexual violence, I had occasion to deal with a rape appeal. A young 22-year-old person had been convicted for having committed rape when he was about 19. He was a little older by the time. He had spent 7 years in jail by the time it came before me, accused of commission of rape by a little 7-year-old girl. And this case had raised several issues. There's no time to go into those. But I had realized the huge gaps in the law relating to sexual violence, even in trials faced in court, especially the secondary traumatization of the victim, the barrier which linguistics could prove to be, because it was a Tamil child, a child from South India, for our international participants, where they speak a different language, Tamil, and the investigation the offense was committed in Delhi. So the investigation and the trial were all in Delhi. The trial judge was a judge from another part of the country. The investigating officer was from the eastern part of the country. So everybody is speaking different languages. And at the bottom line was that in the evidence, the ingredients of the offense weren't made out. At that, they had used innocuous statements like he did bad things to me, he did wrong things to me at one point, the colloquialism. And I had to write an opinion that linguistics by itself could be a huge barrier to accessing justice to a victim of sexual violence. So similar barriers, women especially face several barriers where sexual violence is concerned. And I see no reason why same barriers will not be faced by a victim of sexual harassment. The first barrier, of course, would be coming from her family. The family will discourage it. Society is certainly discouraging women have ignorance, especially this lady Bhavri Devi in Vishaka, the woman who was gang raped. She was ignorant of legal procedures and what the interface with the police would involve. Illiteracy, then lack of finances is a huge barrier. Especially where sexual harassment at workplace is concerned, the first fear that the woman would have is that she would lose her job, and that would by itself be a huge barrier which she has to overcome before she thinks of making the complaint. And then fear of institutions. We are generically afraid of seeking institutional help. Even as a young, even legally trained minds would be reluctant to approach an institution and make a complaint of something which involves such private disclosures. And then the procedural tangles which make it so difficult. Now, virtual sexual harassment, as you have pointed out, Anju, is very difficult to prove and requires a lot of technical electronic evidence. And we are still evolving in the courts as to the manner electronic evidence has to be led and how it is to be brought. So these are huge barriers which women facing sexual harassment feel. But what we have to realize is that the largest challenge that these kind of cases provide is that we must understand that procedurally, once the age-old adage, one size fit all, does not fit. We have to provide case-specific procedures and mechanisms. For instance, for cases of rape in the court, I was able to work out a vulnerable witness deposition complex to provide an interface between the perpetrator and the victim. We saved space where the victim had a separate waiting area where we recorded a testimony on a video link. Within the court complex, a separate entrance we were picking up in Delhi. We inaugurated the first such facility in September 2012, way before Nirbhaya happened. Those of us know about the horrific gang rape. And before I left Delhi in 2018, more than 5,000 such witnesses had been examined in these facilities in 6 district courts in Delhi. Same thing we have inaugurated in Kashmir and 2 other districts in Jammu. But what we must realize is that one size does not fit all. We must ensure proper sensitized inquiry procedures, and also that relief and compensation must be an integral part of what we are able to assure to the victim. For instance, the harassment as we are looking at could be online. Similarly, we need to evolve procedures that we can record evidence also virtually. For instance, if the victim is suffering from physical disability, and all this will ensure a sense of safety and accessibility in workplaces to the women. There have been several instances where several complainants have complained against the same respondent. So we have to explore the possibility of bringing in class actions, as we call them, in civil cases, if the offender is the same person. Also, there is no mechanism of putting the recommendations of the internal committee in the public domain. That is, this would ensure transparency in the inquiry procedure. Now, an incident of sexual harassment results in violation of equality. It discriminates against the women. It violates a right to employment. It violates a right to life. But at the same time, an incident of sexual harassment would be a penal offense. It's an offense which is punishable by criminal law. It is equally should be covered under the definition of misconduct under the disciplinary rules of the employer, bringing in disciplinary action, which would include suspension, removal from service, or whatever is necessary. But we need to provide for these kind of measures. And, the pernicious nature of sexual harassment, the extent to which it pervades, and the impunity with which it is happening shows that the punishment has to be more stringent. So I think we must look at legislation which is more stringent, since you as an organization will be looking at putting in have more voice where it will matter to get legal provisions incorporated. I'm pointing out these things to you. Also, women victims prefer the in-house mechanism under the law, and however there is opacity in the procedure and the methodology of the ICC, which is diluting the efficacy of the remedy. So please look at how it can be done. Am I overstepping my time limit?
No, ma'am, please continue. It's okay.
Now, also, we have no mechanism for monitoring and ensuring the constitution that all companies and organizations have constituted ICCs. Now, this must be pursued more stringently, and penalty must be more severe. We must apportion liability and fix culpability, and also emphasize external voices on the committees which are conducting the inquiry. For instance, if the allegation of the sexual harassment is against the head of the organization, then a person who is subordinate to that head and is a member of the ICC will certainly not do justice to the victim. So we must provide for different mechanisms for different contingencies, and then repeat offenders, and serial offenders. The law must differentiate between the penalty which is provided. And most important to ensure justice to the victim is that we must ensure a level playing field for marginalized victims and special processes, for instance, for the specially abled, as I have said. Now, Maria has said a lot about trainings and the extreme need for attitudinal changes and sensitization. We have, I have mentioned linguistics as a barrier where the complainant is concerned, but you see where biases come in. We've recently heard about that High Court judge, I'm sorry to say, while granting anticipatory bail to a rape victim, commented in his order that it was unbecoming of the Indian woman to sleep after being raped, or words to this effect. And similarly, in the trial, with the famous trial, in the rape trial from Rajasthan, where it was said men of a particular community would not rape a woman of that community. So, there's another judge who is reported to have said that it was acceptable for a man to beat his wife as long as he took good care of her, Now, these are, examples of sexual harassment. I'm referring to courts again, come in very subtle forms. For I remember an incident when I was a lawyer, where a young lawyer who was in the final stages of her pregnancy, and the doctor advised her against driving or moving to the court, sent in a colleague to make a request for a 2-week adjournment in a case before a family court judge. And the judge asked the lawyer, was reluctant to adjourn. So when the lawyer requesting the adjournment said that her colleague was medically advised not to move, the judge's comment was that, doesn't your friend know that no maternity leave is prescribed in your profession? So this makes being a woman in the legal profession itself being challenged, very challenging. We have taken for granted that workspaces are intended for men. For instance, in the Delhi High Court, as a judge, I was sworn in as a judge in 2004. There was no ladies' toilet attached to the judges' lounge. I pestered all the male judges. They used to, and as Maria said, they found it very irritating, and it took almost 13 years of badgering, pestering for them to hive out space to make a ladies' toilet with the judges' lounge. We have a lot of visitors to that lounge. Judges' wives come there when we have official functions and gatherings, and it was taken for granted that only male judges, or they thought that only men will be judges. But either ways, I've seen the same in Kashmir. There are so many courts, district courts, where I've seen that there are no lockups for women prisoners. So when they bring a woman prisoner to the court, she is kept in the police van the whole time she's in the court waiting for her case to be called. And this could be the whole day. Imagine a day if on which that woman prisoner was menstruating, or even otherwise. It's look at the extreme discomfort. You don't even think of these things. Then also, I don't think there's any office which has special rooms for a lactating mother. A woman who comes back to an office straight after having delivered a baby. Certainly she needs private space. And I've tried to create childcare rooms in the courts in Kashmir. I've succeeded in the Srinagar district courts, but at least I've started the conversation. I'm talking of beyond creches, the very few workspaces where there are creches. Women are subjected to comments on clothing, marital status, professional success in courts, and even women discard such sexist remarks as humor. So what was said by Maria was so significant and important that we really have to begin sensitization at the grassroots level. Sexual harassment is not a gender or a mere communication problem. It is completely unacceptable behavior which creates insecurity and an apprehensive environment for women. Maria has said a lot about the economic, impact of sexual harassment, as it reduces the opportunity for women and is detrimental for the economy. But what makes me truly sad is, despite India having the law and despite the development and the progress which women in the West claim, what is the first level of complaint? No woman goes to the police. No woman goes to the governing body or the board of directors. They take to Twitter and the social media for lodging their complaints. I think this speaks volumes about where we are, where sexual harassment is concerned. This actually manifests that Vishaka committees have not succeeded in inspiring confidence in the women employees. And it speaks volumes about the urgent steps needed to create confidence in places for women. I'll close with one comment about a judgment I wrote after I came here in August 2018. A case came before me where two women had lodged a complaint of rape against a man who was running an agency for providing employment to young women in different places. And this man was using, under the shield of this agency, he was sexually exploiting the young women who came to him. And the court, the man had challenged the rape charges in the court. The court dismissed the case, but said that there must be a mechanism evolved for addressing the grievance. So when I came to the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, I looked into the matter and did some research, and found that there was a coinage of an expression called sextortion, by the International Association of Women Judges, of which I was a member. And we did extensive research, and I wrote a judgment in September 2018 and called upon the government to look at legislating. At that time, as per the law which was in vogue, the government of Jammu and Kashmir was able to legislate. And in September, I think it's September 2018, sextortion was made an offense on the Ranbir Penal Code in Jammu and Kashmir. And, they also amended the definition of rape to include, as clause 8ly, amended the definition of consent, which is the critical area in sexual harassment, to say consent obtained by use of authority. I'm loosely explaining it to you, is not considered as consent, and the act would be covered under the definition of rape. So what is, conventionally or, we used as Me Too, or called the Me Too movement, if an incident of Me Too happened in Jammu and Kashmir, you would be hauled up for rape and not only be charged under 354 for outraging the modesty of a woman. And that apart, sextortion by itself, sexual harassment at workplace, would be covered under sextortion, and you would be charged for sextortion, which is an offense punishable with imprisonment up to 3 years. So we are the only place in the world which has a law like sextortion. It is not there in the rest of India even, but it's a special union territory, and we have been able to create a huge achievement in this amendment in the law here. But it is, while I said that we take to Twitter and the social media for lodging a complaint, it is unfortunate that because of the patriarchy and stereotyping, it is only women who are talking of glass ceilings and these kind of barriers. I had a nephew who was sitting in the room hearing all of you speak, and he finds it absolutely abominable that we are only talking of sexual harassment of women at the workplace, and we need to be gender neutral. That's another area. Perhaps we'll have a discussion on that another time. But thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to meeting all of you and sharing this platform with you. I just share with you that domestic violence is a huge issue. COVID-19 and these lockdowns have raised this. I have taken it up suo moto about 4 months ago, and it is part of several orders which I have passed. And I have had my legal services authority teams go out and meet women who had made complaints of domestic violence or had sought maintenance from the courts. And our experience here has been that none of the maintenance orders are being complied with. Women who had filed for custody, women who had filed for maintenance are really, really suffering. We aren't even talking about those women. In some districts, we've been able to get some assistance from the Red Cross or otherwise have asked the government to treat them as BPL and give them at least rations. But sexual harassment at the workplace, in the virtual space, and domestic violence is really the worst things that the women are facing because of the lockdown and the COVID-19 restrictions. Thank you very much. This I had to share because I'm sure all of you are strong women who are going to be able to do a lot for the women who are in distress.
Thank you so very much, ma'am. I mean, it was such an illuminating talk. We had kept 10 minutes for questions, and now we are in time. So, if any quick questions anybody has, anybody would want, put in a question. Yes, Dr. Harbeen, please. Yes, Dr. Harbeen.
Thank you, Anju. I just couldn't let go of this opportunity to address a question to Justice Geeta Ji. First of all, thank you. Really much gratitude. This is amazing. My question is that these days on the media, you mentioned about social media, on mainstream TV channels, we see a lot of sort of aggressive reporting. Yes, I'm not getting into who's right, who's wrong, who's culpable, who's not. But we see boundaries being crossed, stopping people at red lights, especially women, feeling that you're free to accost them. I mean, are there any boundaries in these? I mean, and these are mainstream media channels which are supposed to be standing up for us. I don't know if it is giving sort of a permission to everybody, because millions of people are watching this. It is giving added permission to everybody to feel okay to accost women like that, and indulge in that kind of an aggressive, microaggressive or overtly aggressive behavior. When it comes, it perturbs me to see. As I said, I'm not getting into the merits or whatever, because it is not the courts. The courts are here, but just the mainstream media reporting, the way it is pushing the boundaries when it comes to conducting itself in a certain way with women. Just that.
I was disconnected. Was this a question? I'm sorry, I've just got reconnected.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That was a question to you.
Okay. If you're talking about what's happening these days, I'm appalled. I don't know how investigation can be leaked and nobody's talking about it. I don't want to be quoted because there's privacy of the individuals concerned. There is, requirements. There's certain law provides as to what can be done and what cannot be done during investigation. And I'm sure that some legal agency will look into this, But in my position, cannot say more. There are many, many rights and issues in this.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask one question. More the laws that we are creating for women, it seems that at the societal level, it's working against them. What you hear today is why should I hire a woman? First, she wants a maternity leave, and then I'm always in danger of a complaint being filed. So somehow, the intent of the law is not percolating down. There's a huge disconnect. The laws which are meant to be for welfare are kind of turning against us. How do we bridge that gap?
No, you have no choice. I think we women have to speak, and we have to speak assertively. So long as we are able to push it under the carpet, there are several men who are on the same side as we are. There's only a few aberrations, who are bad eggs, as you may call them. But we have to speak louder. We have to support women who are in difficulty. And certain things. There is no option here. You need the legislation. Women need the protection. For instance, when domestic violence, I was hearing a case on marital rape in the Delhi High Court. I didn't finish. I had to move out of the court. I was appointed as Chief Justice in Jammu and Kashmir. The whole argument against marital rape only is that it will be misused. Domestic violence, it will be misused. 498A, it will be misused. You don't remove 302 because it will be misused. You don't remove kidnapping because it will be misused. So, and how many cases there are of misuse? So it's all a matter of what you're highlighting. We need to sensitize. I took sexual violence training to the schools. In Delhi, I was training school children. I began with modern school. I went to government schools. I went to Mothers International. We went to several schools, and I brought those children in, and I had a brainstorming with them. It was wonderful, the kind of evolved statements that those children were making. You have to sensitize. You have to begin young. On sexual violence, sexual harassment at workplace, environment laws, mediation. All these are things that we have to begin conversations with children. I was talking to children from class 8 to class 11. I took them to police stations. I took them to hospitals to explain to them how medical examinations are done of sexual violence. So those are the kind of trainings, and we have to aggressively address.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We are now pressed for time, and as I see it, we can go on, and I think we will soon organize another round with you, ma'am. It's really needed. And I would like to now formally propose a vote of thanks, and I'm delighted to conclude this session, this wonderful evening. Who's that?
My name is Rakshika. Can I ask one small question to Justice Mittal, ma'am, if it's permitted?
Rakshika, we are out of time now. People are logged in from various places. You send me your question, Rakshita, and I'll definitely send it to ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you so much. So to conclude, this vote of thanks for these wonderful interactions today. This council, which aims to create dialogue, plan strategies to direct outreach and advocacy. We hope, that we made a beginning today and we can make a splash now. We also hope to collaborate with, members of the society, organizations, national and international, to move on a path to eradicate sexual harassment, which, as ma'am correctly said, is a very difficult task. So thank you so very much, Justice Mittal, for taking out time of your hectic schedule. Your inputs were so informative. You made the session so alive, and I really cannot thank you enough. Your inputs, I've noted them, and I will be in touch with you again to take this forward. And Maria Beatrice, thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday morning for you from Washington. Your information and global perspective has also, taught us a lot, and we hope to collaborate with you and take this work that we have started today forward. I also want to thank Dr. Harbeen for starting Wiki and giving me personally a chance to, work with this cell, and we hope we can do justice to the role we have taken up. And a big thank you to Nikita and Pranjal, who has been working with us endlessly. These are both my students who I have taught. And I hope we can all work together in future. Thank you everybody who joined in today. Thank you very much. Ma'am, thank you so much. I will be in touch. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.